Talking about some labor and environmental standards is where we left off with last time. And we brought up the race to the bottom. What kind of race was that?
Standards and price races.
Okay, so that's good. Good type of race, competition, getting healthy and fit, that kind of race, or what's the concern with the race to the bottom?
The standards of like quality and environmental protection and labor protection, etc. decreasing.
Tend to go, down. So, and then we bring in, I guess, the competing thought. That sounds bad on the front end of it. But as we start to try to think about imposing standards, what are we doing?
Raising the price of things.
Raising the price. So does that help out poor people very much? No. Does that help more people get employed in other countries if they have to meet the same standards? So if we keep American companies in the United States because all foreign companies must meet the stringent standards or maybe even tougher standards abroad, because it's a secret ploy to keep American jobs here, are we helping out the foreign producers or the foreign employees? Do we care about foreign employees? Maybe we don't. Maybe we're completely all about Americans. If it hurts Americans, then screw it. We're not doing it. It's not better for ourselves. I don't know. There's all these kind of issues that surround international trade that we can stir up. All right, so that's what we're exploring here. How do we define labor standards? One thing we tend to agree on pretty much, not completely though, is child labor. Now, we don't do child labor in the United States, do we?
Technically, yes.
Where do we see child labor?
Family-run establishments.
Okay, family-run businesses. Where else? Pretty common in Kansas, actually.
Paper route.
In Iowa, paper route might be some exceptions there. And farming, yeah, big-time farmers. Throw that 9-year-old on a tractor and start plowing the field.
Yeah, that's why I tutor 8th graders and 5 of them have their licenses.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we believe in child labor. Don't kid yourself. Yeah, we're all anti. I know our pictures in our heads is that we have children working in factories running sharp-bladed machines that are cutting up stuff. But that's not necessarily the case. So, and what makes it more interesting is if these people are starving, is it right to impose our Western standards on the 13-year-old not being able to go to work if they're struggling to put food in their mouth and a decent amount of shelter over their head and clothes on their back? I don't know, it becomes tougher, doesn't it? We allow our 13-year-olds to jump on the tractor here in the United States, but we're saying the 13-year-olds can't do it there. And it's some interesting issues as we start to impose standards around the world. So what do you think the low-income countries think about this?
Probably somewhat contrast, probably somewhat split.
I bet, yeah, there's probably some split camps for sure. Would they tend to have more proponents of it or less relative to the United States? What would be your gut feeling? Ethan, what do you think?
You'd probably have less supporters of it.
Less supporters of the restrictions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so again, if it's hard to, we see pictures, but it's hard to kind of feel what's going on all the time in those countries. So a a lot of low-income countries resist. All right, so let's watch a little video. We might even have a couple videos today. We'll make it a more fun little video day. Let's see here. Where is this one? Here we go. Sweatshops.
The New York Times recently reported on the case of Nafta Masongo, an employee at a clothing factory in Newcastle, South Africa. Masongo works long hours in tough conditions, all for only $36 per week. If that sounds low, it is, even by South African standards, where the legal minimum wage is $57 per week. Many people would describe Masongo's factory as a sweatshop, and many would say that the owners of the sweatshop are treating Masongo and their other employees unfairly. Now in this video, I don't want to try to fully settle the question of whether sweatshops treat their workers unfairly or not. Let's grant for the sake of argument that they do. The point I want to make here is that even if sweatshop workers are treated unfairly, there are 3 points to be made in defense of sweatshops. First, it's important to remember that the exchange between the worker and her employer is mutually beneficial, even when it's unfair. Sweatshops make their employees better off, even if they don't make them as much better off as critics think they should. Consider sweatshop wages. As you might recall, Masongo earned $36 a week at her sweatshop job. Compare this with her friend, who lost her job at a sweatshop after it was closed for violating minimum wage laws and had to find work as a nanny. That friend wound up earning just $14 a month, less than 12% of what Masongo earned. And this wage gap is typical of sweatshop jobs relative to other jobs in the domestic economy. Studies have shown that sweatshop jobs often pay 3 to 7 times the wages paid elsewhere in the economy. So even if we think the conditions of sweatshop labor are unfair, relative to their other alternatives, sweatshop labor is a very attractive option for workers in the developing world. And this is why those workers are often so eager to accept so-called sweatshop jobs. Now, no one on either side of the debate defends forced labor, but so long as sweatshop labor is voluntary, even in the weak sense of being free from physical coercion, workers will only take a job in a sweatshop when that job is better for them than any of their other alternatives. This is true even if we grant that sweatshop workers' freedom is often limited in a variety of unjust ways by their government or by the so-called coercion of poverty. Coercion constrains options, but as long as workers are free to choose from within their constrained set of options, we can expect them to select those jobs that offer the best prospects of success. And when given the choice between working in a sweatshop or working on a farm or working elsewhere in the urban economy, workers consistently choose the sweatshop job. The second point to be made in defense of sweatshops is this. Even if you think sweatshop labor is unfair, it's a bad idea to prohibit it. Think of it this way. People only take sweatshop jobs because they're desperately poor and low on options. But taking away sweatshops does nothing to eliminate that poverty or to enhance their options. In fact, it only reduces them further, taking away what workers themselves regard as the best option they have. Now, of course, most anti-sweatshop activists aren't trying to shut down factories, but sometimes well-intentioned actions have unintended consequences. The layoffs faced by Masongo's friend are a stark demonstration of this. That friend was fired because the owners of her factory decided it would be better to stop doing business altogether than to pay the legal minimum wage. And while you can make it illegal for factories to pay low wages, you cannot make it illegal for them to pay no wages by shutting down altogether. The third and final point is this. It's better to do something to help the problem of global poverty than it is to do nothing. And sweatshops are doing something to help. They're giving people jobs that pay better than their other alternatives, and they're contributing to a process of economic development that has the potential to affect dramatic increases in living standards. Most of us, on the other hand, do nothing to improve the lives of these workers. And that includes American companies that don't outsource their production at all, but instead give their jobs to U.S. workers who, by global standards, are already some of the world's wealthiest people. So, take the perspective of one of the world's poor for a moment, and ask yourself, which looks better to you? The American company that outsources to a sweatshop, or the American company that, because of its high-minded moral principles, doesn't? Maybe the sweatshop is run by people who are greedy and shallow in their motivations. And maybe the other company is run by people with the purest of intentions. But good intentions don't get you a job, and they don't feed your family. So, which looks better now?
Alright, what do you think's the key thing there?
It's better to pay something than nothing at all.
Better to pay something than nothing. So when somebody says to you as an econ student, maybe even thinking about supporting free trade, and they say, well, what do you think about sweatshops? Don't you think those are bad? What's your response?
I always thought they were bad, but like, if you like actually think about it, a little bit of money is better than no money at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's weird.
So in econ class, what's the correct response when somebody hits you?
Depends.
It depends, or compared
margin.
to, yeah, at the margin, that's a key one. Compared to what, right? That's the key thing. Compared to working here at, McDonald's or working at Ottawa University, yeah, it sucks. Compared to prostitution in a foreign country, that's a pretty good job, right? Compared to what? It has no meaning unless you have something to reference it to. And so I think his point should be well taken by really anybody when you think about the opportunities that exist for the people who are involved with it within their sphere, not your sphere over in the United States, but what's relevant in your world. That's where things start to have relative meaning. And so economists are big on the relative cost of something. Your wife is ugly. Well, ugly compared to what? Right? That's the economist's knee-jerk reaction to just about anything. You just don't make statements like that. You gotta have something to compare. It's always something relative to the other. It's hot outside. Compared to what? Compared to a month ago when it was the polar vortex was coming out? Yeah, it's pretty darn hot out today at 35. Compared to August, it's pretty cold outside, right? Compared to what? There's lots of those sorts of questions that come out when we start to think a little bit more critically about it. Okay. So here's some child labor stuff. Ages 5 to 14. Now I have trouble with the 5-year-old thing, and then maybe you should say compared to what, Russ? But 5 just seems real little. But maybe I could even be persuaded. But so 5 to 14. Here is our statistics in terms of millions. So who's bad? Well, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson action. So thinking about these statistics, what makes these relative? So Asia's got the big bar here. Are they the worst offender of this group?
We get actual percentages of children doing this.
Okay, so compared to what? What would be a good thing to compare to decide if Africa's worse than Asia in this case with the millions that they employ? Compared to total child population, some sort of population number, right? So as we start to look here, as a percent of the population, well, it looks like it's a little heavier in Africa relative, one statistic relative to another. All right.
But couldn't that also just mean that the percentage of children in Africa is higher than in Asia? If we make it higher. You see what I'm saying? Like there's just more children in Africa, even though Asia has more employed.
Yeah, as far as taking it with respect to the population or the child population?
Yeah, like it could be shitting the
Yeah, yep, that's possible that, yeah, if there's a larger fraction, as long as you keep it consistent, it tells at least part of the story, whether you use the total child population or the entire population. But yeah, if I'm understanding your question right, if the population is 300 million and there's 5 million kids,
Right.
and there's 5 million kids that are all working, 100% of the kids are working,
Right.
whereas, is that what you were getting
that's
at?
what I
Yeah,
was
yep. Good point. Okay, so, labor activists versus trade economists, this is kind of what that video highlighted. Activists tend to want to use protectionist policies. Trade economists think that protectionism's probably ineffective, and probably the gains from trade outweigh some benefits of those negative elements. Four concerns. What do you think? Do you see a problem? Only large countries or coalitions of large countries can use trade barriers successfully. What's the problem there?
Gives large countries, wealthy countries an unfair advantage.
Yeah, so they've kind of got the upper hand on it, right? Since they're kind of the dominant player. If they're the big ones, then they're the ones really setting the policy, setting the stage, and possibly using some of that power to tilt the scale their way or to specific industries. All right, video time. Kind of started this off with Nafta. Let's see what our president has to say about free trade. This is not unusual for other presidents to more or less do the same thing, as you'll see here.
I believe in free trade, and as somebody who lived overseas, who has family overseas, I've seen what's happened in terms of rising living standards around the globe, and that's a good thing for America. It's good for our national security.
I don't think NAFTA has been good for America, and I never have.
I believe in free trade, and that's a good thing for America. It's good for our national security. I think we should use the hammer of a potential opt-out as leverage to ensure that we actually get labor and environmental standards that are enforced. I believe in free trade.
But what I refuse to accept is that we have to sign trade deals like the South Korea agreement. That's why I oppose NAFTA. That's why I voted against CAFTA. That's why it didn't make sense to normalize trade relations with China without asking more from China. I will oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement.
That's a good thing for America. It's good for our national security.
I want to be very clear. I don't think NAFTA has been good for America, and I never have.
He's not alone in that. There's been plenty of Republicans that have probably you can run the same little bit on. Is everybody crystal clear on where President Obama is on trade?
What is the North American Free Trade Agreement?
Not doing that one. So, is that standard politics there? Does that sound familiar with other issues? Depending on which way the wind is.
Who's he talking
The wind
to?
is blowing. Yep. Different audience, different spiel. That's the political economy, not the real economy. So we gotta think about that as we get into the issues. Here's another. This one's a little bit longer than oh, actually, wait, I wanted to do this one's kind of, maybe I'll just play it.
Hi, Billy. Hi. Who are you? I'm the narrator. What are you doing? I'm playing with my Commander Joe action figure. Would you like to know where your Commander Joe action figure came from? Yes. Turn him over. He's made in Mexico. Would you like to learn the story of why Commander Joe comes from Mexico? No, not really. Come. The story starts back in the early 1990s. What's happening? We're going back in time.
We're making good profits, but there must be a way to make more. If we could only pay those employees slave wages, we could double profits.
We used to have the slaves. A great way to lower overhead.
And I want a market where I can dump cheap food my large corporation grows, but makes it hard for private farmers to get into.
What we need is a trade agreement with a poor country. They'll give us all the benefits of cheap labor and the benefit of tariff-free trade into the United States.
It's 1992. Let's take a look at a small town in Mexico. Those farmers don't look like they're doing so good. These Mexican farmers are poor, but many own their own small farms and grow corn. Yay, corn! Now let's take a look at some of their U.S. counterparts in your very own hometown, Billy. It's the auto parts plant. These particular U.S. auto plant workers make about $26 an hour. They have good medical and retirement benefits and are members of the local union. Yay, auto parts! Here, in 1992, the United States has a $5.4 billion trade surplus with Mexico. What's a trade surplus? Professor Egghead?
Well, a simple explanation is that a trade surplus is when a country exports or sells more goods to a foreign country than it buys, thus bringing wealth into the country.
So the trade surplus with Mexico here in 1992 is a good thing? Yes, but it could be better. If Nafta passes, that is. What's Nafta? NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement.
NAFTA would break down the tariffs that exist between the United States and Mexico, allowing for easy trade between the two countries, which will result in lots of jobs and money for both nations. The prosperity that NAFTA brings to both countries will also drastically cut down the number of illegal immigrants that come in from Mexico each year.
Not everyone agrees with that. Some people worry that NAFTA will send U.S. jobs to Mexico.
Only fools and weird third-party candidates don't think NAFTA will work.
So, last year we had a $5.4 billion trade surplus. Now, if that trend continued for another 2 years, and NAFTA will, by removing those barriers, greatly accelerate it, we will have a larger trade surplus with Mexico than with any country in the entire world. And this treaty would increase jobs here? Oh, no question about it. Because there was an announcement today that it would be minimal either way. There have been 23 studies of the impact of NAFTA on jobs in the United States. 22 of them have shown that it will cause an increase in jobs in the United States. The one that didn't showed that there would be a decline in illegal immigration, and they counted all of the illegal immigrants as holding jobs. And when they were taken out of the picture, they said that was a decline. Everybody else says it increases jobs in the United States. Bethesda, Maryland. Hello.
Good evening, Larry. I'd like to ask the Vice President specifically to answer, in terms of a time limit, how long, how many years, 5, 8, 10 years, will it be before we see these new jobs in America that are supposed to be out there?
Just wait. How long? Well, we're already seeing a great many new jobs. We have seen 400,000 new jobs just in the last 5 years because of Mexico's unilateral decision to lower the barriers to U.S. products. We'll see 200,000 jobs, it is estimated, over the next several years. But there'll be a dip first, right? In the wake of Nafta, no, no, no. We think absolutely no. Unions are wrong? Oh yes, I think they're wrong.
It's late 1993. Nafta passes both houses of Congress.
I voted for Nafta. Yay!
Who's that? It doesn't matter. He won't be important for another 10 years. December 8, 1993. Bill Clinton signs Nafta into law.
My name is Bill, and I'm signing a bill. Hooray!
It's 1994, and NAFTA begins to go into effect. Major U.S. agricultural companies begin corn dumping in Mexico. What's corn dumping? Is it when corn takes a crap? No, Billy. In America, the U.S. government gives financial subsidies to farmers and corporations to farm. This government money allows farmers to sell corn at a cheaper price than it costs to grow it. Then some of that corn is shipped to Mexico and sold for less than it costs for Mexican farmers to grow corn. This causes some Mexican workers to lose their farms because they can't compete with cheap American corn. Back in your hometown, the auto parts plant announces some layoffs. These employees are forced to find jobs, very often at a fraction of what they made before.
I flip burgers to support my family. Hooray!
At the same time, some major U.S. manufacturers begin to move some jobs to Mexico. I got a job. Hooray! Mexican workers at this factory get paid $1.50 an hour, much less than their American counterparts. Plus, these corporations often don't pay the Mexican workers medical or retirement benefits.
Okay. So, from that video, what do you think about what was shown that's not being talked about? It's all fun and games to watch the little cartoon guys and watch the Mexicans lose their jobs and the American auto workers lose their jobs.
Surplus of low price goods. Consumer surplus of low.
Okay, so who's potentially benefiting that they're not illustrating? Consumers of those goods. So consumer prices comes down. Remember, that's being spread over a whole bunch of consumers, and it might be kind of a small dollar amount. So there's a lot of benefit coming that through lower prices. What other group might be missing? Or is missing from that? Corn producers, they were getting the subsidy, so they were kind of included with the benefits there, the way they illustrated, because they were able to sell their corn to the Mexicans, although it was below cost. So that was the dumping argument that we talked about last time. And that's part of why they've gotten rid of those subsidies as part of the rounds of GATT. We're missing somebody, though. We've got seems like the Mexican farmers are screwed, the American automakers are screwed, maybe the consumers are benefiting from lower prices, and then there's one other group that didn't get talked about at all in this video, but as international econ students, I'd like you to think about. That's always what makes it interesting. It's the stuff that we don't see on these videos.
I think most of the people that they're competing with, like Ford, car maker.
So and it could be a car maker, but it could just be other industries, right? So the lower trade barriers allowed other industries to emerge. So the auto manufacturing is in decline, but something else is emerging that we have a comparative advantage in to ship down there. So that's the thing that they don't discuss here that might be a lot harder to recognize. So I think this next video gives a little bit more, well, it rides both sides of the fence. I'm trying to find some videos that kind of go both ways here. This was a PBS special.
In recent weeks, we've asked you to tell us what you think is causing our persistently high unemployment rate and sluggish economic growth. Many of you answered with a single acronym: NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. The deal was engineered by the first Bush administration and passed by the Clinton administration. The idea to spur economic growth by eliminating most tariffs.
So Clinton and Gore,
exports,
Democrat
and
or Republican, by the way?
so everyone could buy products at a cheaper price.
Yes.
On its face, that sounds pretty good, but critics say eliminating those tariffs made the low cost of doing business abroad too attractive. And as a result, American manufacturing jobs have been decimated. Later in the broadcast, I'll be interviewing Mickey Cantor, the former U.S. trade representative who helped broker the deal with Mexico and Canada. But first, Need to Know correspondent Rick Carr has this report on how NAFTA has changed one Midwestern city.
Today, Evansville looks like the quintessential American small city
Indiana.
with modern corporate headquarters buildings on the downtown skyline.
Illinois, isn't it?
But in the past, it was a factory town, and one industry loomed larger than the rest. The city was the refrigerator capital of the world. Back in the 1950s, Evansville hosted college football's Refrigerator Bowl and chose a Miss Refrigeradorable. The Whirlpool plant on the city's north side provided jobs that helped a few generations of residents of the Evansville area, an estimated 50,000 of them, buy homes and raise families.
My dad, 3 uncles, 4 brothers, all worked here at Whirlpool at one time.
Darrell Collins joined them in 1970 when Whirlpool was the region's largest employer.
I hired in Whirlpool, shortly after high school, and I figured I'd retire there.
In 2009, Darrell Collins was close to retirement. He was 58, working as president of the union local that represented Whirlpool's Evansville employees. He'd recently been through contract negotiations. The union had given in to management demands and made concessions in an effort to keep the plant open. His understanding was that the company would do that.
They were telling us they were going to hire 600 people, make Whirlpool better, more job security. People went out and bought houses and cars, thinking that was going to happen.
He was in his office at the union hall when he got a call from management.
Told me to come to the plant, said the plant's closing. And I looked at the person down there doing the bad news. And I said, what can the union do to make this not happen? Can we sit down and talk? He said, no, it's done. You can't work for pennies on the dollar.
After nearly 80 years, refrigerators would no longer be built in Evansville. Whirlpool shuttered the factory and transferred production to Mexico. Today, the plant is available for new development, and the old Union Hall is abandoned and up for sale. 1,100 factory workers lost their jobs when the plant closed, and some of them blame NAFTA.
If it hadn't been for NAFTA, I believe that our plant would still be there.
Okay.
Natalie Ford was one of more than 1,000 members of Darrell Collins' union local who lost their jobs.
But, you can't blame businesses if you can go down to Mexico and pay them $1.35, $1.85 an hour, where we're getting paid $13, $15, $16 an hour, and they're not going to get penalized for bringing them back across the border. It's good business, but it's bad for our economy.
NAFTA's effects on the economy are complex. The Liberal Economic Policy Institute estimates that trade with Mexico eliminated a net 24,000 jobs in Indiana, which gives the state the second worst record in the country. Nationally, the Institute estimates that trade with Mexico caused a net loss of about 700,000 jobs. On the other hand, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce argues that American firms have increased their exports to Mexico, and that trade pays for about 1.7 million jobs. Whichever side's right, Mexico's lower wages are attractive to manufacturers. Workers there earn about a sixth of what their counterparts in the U.S. do.
No problem. 6 or 7 minutes.
Evansville's Democratic Mayor Jonathan Weinzapfel says that made the Whirlpool plant closing all but inevitable, NAFTA or not.
For a manufacturing-based economy like we have had here in Evansville, you saw it coming for decades, frankly. You know, a lot of the job movement, the globalization, especially as manufacturers started looking to build things with cheaper labor, lower environmental standards, that movement offshore had been going on literally for decades. So, yes, I mean, you saw the trends, and you know, maybe NAFTA accelerated that, but it was already happening before NAFTA went into effect. Happening before NAFTA went into effect.
NAFTA accelerated the move to Mexico by making it cheaper and easier to do business across the border. Before it went into effect, for example, companies had to pay a 12% tariff on average on parts they shipped into Mexico, and then pay another 2% on average on finished products they shipped back. That resulted in higher costs for them, which meant higher prices for consumers. NAFTA did away with those costs.
From your perspective, has it been a net positive or a net negative for Evansville? I don't know. That's probably not the answer you're looking for, but you're looking for something more definitive. But you see casualties. But on the other hand, there are companies involved in manufacturing. A company called Berry Plastics here in Evansville, headquartered here, about a $4 billion company that has plants throughout the world, and they continue to produce a lot of their plastics materials and products right here in Evansville.
Or take the example of Evansville-based Red Spot Paint. Prior to NAFTA, it paid a duty on every gallon of paint it exported to Mexico. Since the trade pact removed those duties, it can sell its products for less south of the border. Mexican firms are buying more of it, so the company's hired more workers in Evansville to keep up with demand. More than a dozen other firms around town told us NAFTA's increased their opportunities, though none of them would agree to an on-camera interview. The agreement's also been good for American agriculture. NAFTA eliminated a tariff of over 200% on American-grown corn. That made the commodity a lot cheaper in Mexico and helped U.S. farmers boost exports. And Evansville is about to take advantage of NAFTA in another way. North of town, a new road is making its way through Indiana farmland.
In a couple of years, import and export goods are going to be zooming through these cornfields. This is going to be Interstate 69, the NAFTA superhighway, and it's going to connect Evansville to the Canadian border in the north and the Mexican border in the south.
The highway's designed to make it easier for companies in all three countries to get their goods to consumers. At an appliance store near Evansville, we met up with economist Mohammed Qayyum. He says it's consumers who've been the big winners under NAFTA.
We benefit because of a range of things that happen, including more products, greater quality, lower prices. This suit, for instance, is a product from Mexico.
Qayyum is dean of the business school at Evansville's University of Southern Indiana. He says the fridges and other appliances in this store are better than they would have been without free trade. Smarter, more durable, more energy efficient, and cheaper.
When we buy TVs, we may buy two instead of one.
Qayyum says one reason why NAFTA has a bad reputation is because it's easy to put a face on the workers who lost jobs to lower-paid labor in Mexico. But the winners of the trade pact, he says, are everywhere.
It's very difficult to organize us and to express to people, here are the gains from trade.
There's no national union of consumers saying, we
No,
win, we win.
Because we know that, and we don't need to express it. The individuals who are impacted negatively have a reason to organize, and they have a reason to get us who are benefiting to want to do something to address their circumstance.
That's that subsidy, you got the too big firms, too small firms.
Qayyum says the theory is that consumers' gains should offset the pain felt by laid-off workers.
The practice is that that has not happened in a realistic way.
Evansville workers have been feeling the effects of foreign trade since even before NAFTA. Back in the late 80s, Zenith Electronics laid off 1,000 employees. More recently, a packaging manufacturer cut 100 jobs. And the Whirlpool plant closure erased nearly 200 positions at a firm that made refrigerator shelves. Former Whirlpool employee Natalie Ford's experience has been typical of workers displaced by foreign trade. Since the plant closed, her family's finances have taken a big hit. Her husband used to work at Whirlpool too. Now he earns about 20% less at an automotive plant. She's bringing home about half as much between unemployment benefits and what she earns working part-time at a restaurant. But she says that's not as bad as the uncertainty that's gripped her and her husband since the day management announced that the plant was closing.
It's getting irritating. That YouTube down slows the speed down to get it off high def. I think that's all it's doing.
Her husband since the day management announced that the plant was closing.
What was the conversation like in the car on the way home?
I cried a lot. First thing I did was when they said Mexico, I mean everybody
I'm on
was
Explorer.
saying a few choice words, you know. And the first thing I did was get on my phone and call my dad and tell my dad. And then we was like, how are we gonna make it? You know, are we gonna lose everything we worked for all of our lives because it was gone? They just took all that away. I had no idea. I had no idea. And still don't, to this day.
Ford's getting some help launching a new career. A federal program designed to ease the transition for workers displaced by foreign trade is covering her tuition at a local community college. She's studying business administration with an emphasis on human resources.
If you finish this course that you're taking now and you end up with a job in HR, you may have to be the person on the other side of the table at some point saying, we gotta make cuts. How are you gonna deal with that?
I realize that is part of it. You know, you have to do it. But I think I will bring a little bit more compassion to it than they did.
Ford is raising one of her grandsons, and she has a daughter in college.
There you go.
She's making it clear to them that a high school diploma just isn't enough anymore.
Unless you want to work for minimum wage, and then what are you going to have in life?
So, what do you hope for those grandkids in the other room?
Yeah, maybe over that they go to school, get a good education, and go on to college, and have a good life, can support their families, and hopefully not have to go through what we've gone through. That there's some stability for them.
You sound a little tentative when you say that, though. Like you're not sure that that's going to happen.
No one ever knows.
Ford says she's bitter. She sold all the Whirlpool stock in her 401k, and she says she'll never buy the company's products again. Her ex-colleague and union president Darryl Collins won't buy his former employer's products either. Today, he works part-time at a local Chevy dealership and spends his days shuttling cars around the lot. He's only earning about 2/3 of what he used to.
I've often wondered, you know, if they don't stop the downtrend of manufacturing leaving the United States, what's going to be left? They're going to bring it from overseas over here to Mexico or wherever, but they still expect us to buy it. You know, where's the fairness? Our people are supposed to suffer. You know, nobody seems to worry about this working class people.
We asked Whirlpool for comment about our story. The company told us, we employ more U.S. manufacturing workers than all of our major competitors combined. Our company's long-standing strategy is to make products where we have the best cost and best quality so we can provide competitive products to consumers. While Evansville certainly had best quality, it had not been competitive in terms of cost for some time.
So, what do you think about that as you work through some of those details? That's an interesting insight. Yeah, I mean, the capital infrastructure eventually wears down. You know, they bring back the glory days of the 50s or 60s, or even if it's the 80s or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a good insight, that capital eventually wears down. I mean, isn't human nature kind of interesting? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I felt emotional at times to where my head is on pretty straight economics-wise, like knowing the benefits of trade and all that, but you can't help but, you know, feel something when you listen to their personal stories. And so, what did you guys think about that? Do you agree, or?
She's currently enrolled in a class that is going to help her get into a better job. I mean, it's not, no one likes to start at 50 or 60 or whatever that she's putting on her. But the fact of the matter is that the system is in place, and it was nice to see the system was in place to help change things around so that things will understand better. I mean, the two-year intermediate time sucks.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about it. It sucks.
Other thoughts?
If you make like another documentary looking at other people's successes, you can probably, like, I mean, it just seemed like the best idea.
Right.
So depending on the angle you're making the documentary.
And I thought they did at least a decent job of bringing up that paint store and some of the plastic company. At least they brought that into the picture. But you can see how much of a uphill battle it is for economists or other people that support free trade, is that you got this human nature element that's hard to overcome when you hear the individual stories, and it's not hard to say, yeah, I agree, that's not fair, you got screwed. But how do you kind of sell people on, but really believe me, there's 10 other people in the bushes over there that you can't see that are much better off, and maybe in the case of electronics producers, you know, millions of people that have benefited to having better. I thought it was interesting too that the better quality product was brought up. Max?
What do you think, like outside the law, like on a bigger scale, perhaps there's society can use their needs in a better way than what they were providing at Whirlpool. I mean, their the economy or whatever, something orchestrating.
Right.
Perhaps she's going to do more for a human resources firm than she ever could
have done there.
And
yeah.
For utility maximizing everything. So, you know,
punching the clock at yeah. That's good point. All kind of harder to.
I mean, for her, it sucks the whole way around. I think with her husband, like, there's no way to fix that.
But people are pretty resilient. Notice that they can make it through quite a bit. But yeah, it's just kind of, there's nothing set in stone, and you really just got to prepare for change because it's going to happen. All right, we will call it a day there.